Creativity is something that enhances people's well-being.
Hello, I'm Neil Perkin, the host of Think with Google Firestarters, and Firestarters is a series of insightful conversations with the interested and interesting of the advertising, marketing and innovation communities. And today on the podcast, we are looking deeply into the topic of creativity in marketing and in business. And we have the perfect guest to do this with. Our first two guest episodes, so I'm delighted to welcome Sue Unerman and Kathryn Jacob. So Sue was one of the first guests that we had on Firestarters several years ago now, and she's the Global Chief Strategy Officer at Brainlabs. And Kathryn is the CEO of cinema advertising business Pearl & Dean, and also the president of SAWA, the Global Cinema Advertising Association. And Sue and Kathryn are also the authors of a brand new book, which is A Year of Creativity, 52 smart ideas for boosting creativity, innovation and inspiration at work. And Frank Cottrell-Boyce, the writer, has a lovely quote actually about the book. He described the book as an atlas of creativity that celebrates the best of our wild and unpredictable and generous humanity. Love that. I have to say, reading the book, one of my favorite things about it is just these stories. I'm a big fan of stories and how they can bring concepts to life, and this book is full of great stories. So Sue, Kathryn, welcome to Firestarters. Could you maybe give us a bit more on why you wrote the book and what your provocation is for the Firestarters audience?
Of course, and thank you for having me back on, having us both on first time. And that already is a creative act, Neil. You've broken the rules of the podcast. Kathryn, why did we write the book?
We wrote the book, and ironically, although it seems somewhat kind of different to our first two books, so our first book was called The Glass Wall: Success Strategies for Women at Work and Businesses That Mean Business. And our second piece of work together was called Belonging. And Belonging came out of the glass wall because when we were doing the glass wall, we realized that there were lots of communities that weren't being listened to, and that DE and I had become a tick box, not something that would last. And then so that's what Belonging was about, building a workplace where everyone feels they belong. And then I think we came to the realization that creativity is an equally kind of siloed world where you're only creative if people say you're creative. So if you talk to a child, you know, that and say, are you creative? You know, when you're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you say, are you creative? They go, yeah, because I go to my friend Sue's house and we play shops and it's like really great. And she's got a shop and she's got lots and lots of like really great toys there, and they're all in your head. And you can have, I mean, not that Sue and I don't play shops occasionally, but we do go to real ones now. But that whole thing where in your head, there's this whole world that you and your friends share that's just out of your imagination. It feels really vivid and real to you. And you draw pictures of your mum and it's like, looks like a potato. And when you show it to people, they go, you say, that's my mum. And people go, yeah, that is so your mum. And then by the time we get to be about 11, unless you're really brilliant at drawing or doing music, you say to people, "Are you creative?" They go, "Nah, I'm not creative." And so creativity is something that enhances people's well-being. So Lego did some amazing statistics about, I think it was like 80% of people felt there wasn't enough creativity in their life. So people don't think that there's enough creativity in life, and they think that they're not allowed to be creative. And actually, everyone is creative. The minute you've had a thought that isn't linear, which is the solution to a problem, that is a creative thought, but we don't see it as that. And Sue and I wanted to kind of break down the barriers for this and also address the issue around the dominance of left brain thinking, didn't we, Sue?
Yeah, and the thing is that, you know, we're all in our industry, we are all competing, we're all working in a world where, you know, we're pitching, we're trying to, you know, improve margins, we're trying to grow our business, and we're trying to grow our clients' business. And the thing about creativity is that for you know, a relatively small investment of time of doing things differently, you can create real step changes. And you're right, Neil, the book is full of stories about those step changes and how to do them. And, you know, given that we're in a place where people are investing millions, billions in new tech into, Gen AI systems, into expensive people to come and run those systems to make sure they work properly. Honestly, for the price of the book, we will tell you exactly how to exercise your creative muscles and bring that creativity to bear at work. And that will not only pay dividends in terms of step change, it will also make everybody happier. So it's not just a book about better business, it's also a book about better happiness at work. And we spend way too much time at work not to be happy there.
Yeah, very true. Lots to dive into there. I think one of the things you say in the book is about how creativity is often seen as fluffy or elite, perhaps, and how both views are wrong. And from what you're saying there, it's quite interesting perspective from our industry about how we're one of the few industries probably that actually have creative roles, specific creative roles. So do you think that actually means that we box creativity into roles too much?
Absolutely and completely. So I've grown up in an industry where there are the creative directors, there are the executive creative directors, there are the global executive creative directors, and they're the people that will judge creativity. They're the people that will command a team who will be the ones that are creative. And what I know from all my experience in agencies and working with clients is that there is creativity in everybody. And we've seen now we're basically seeing a seismic revolution in the world, whereby the most popular form of content is user-generated content, where the barriers to creativity have completely melted, even in terms, as you know, of production values, because Gen AI can now deliver something with the production quality of a 4-month shoot in about half an hour. And now that there are none of those barriers, now that creativity is democratized in the real world, it needs to be democratized in our industry as well. And I think any business that isn't seeing the creativity in everybody that works there, those are the businesses that are going to be at a disadvantage.
So just picking up on something you said there, Kathryn, about diversity as well, and the books you've written before. I mean, it's one of the things you talk about diversity in the opening part, and also about psychological safety. And it struck me really that if we bring together cognitive and other forms of diversity, lots of academic research has shown that diverse perspectives on the same team or together help you to solve problems better and faster. Particularly when you combine it with psychological safety, as you said there, which means that you're actually getting the most out of every single person in that environment. So it feels like a bit of a superpower to do that, to have diversity combined with psychological safety. Is that really what you're saying in that part of the book?
Yeah, it is, because so much of the innovation work that people do comes from a place that is sometimes removed from the end user experience. So take, for example, if the abandoned cart element in online shopping, right? Why does that happen? I've gone to the effort of finding your website. I've found the beautiful pair of trousers that I want to buy, gone to the effort of putting in my credit card number. I'm trying to think. And then at the end, companies go, "Hi, would you like to join our members club? Hi, would you like to get our newsletter?" And people just go, "I was only planning." I mean, buying the trousers probably takes about 3 minutes. Trying to get out of the website takes you about another 10, because it's like the kind of buying equivalent of meeting someone really tedious at a drinks party who keeps turning up just when you think you're having a good conversation, you go, "Hi, Neil, remember me? You spoke to me earlier and then made an excuse to go away, but I've come back again." Yeah. That is because no one who ever works in that organization has ever walked through the shoes of a consumer going to their website. They go, "What we really want to do is we want to sign them up and send them, and then we can see what they're up to." Great. I'm never going to work, do anything with you again because you've made it really hard. And so the idea that, so it's the same as if you go to a shop and people go, "Yeah, would you like to sign up for our loyalty card?" And they've lost the will to live because they've had to ask everyone to do it. And someone's standing there going, "No, I don't. And it's just hard. And it seems like a great idea, but make it easy. Go, if you sign up for our
But
loyalty.
also make it possible for those people who do work within your organization, who are aware that the processes are terrible, make it possible for them to be able to speak up, right?
Yeah.
Make sure you hear them, because that's the other part about what you're saying, is that in an organization, there will be people who are completely and absolutely aware of why people are abandoning the shopping basket, but they're actually, there's no safe place for them to contribute that very valuable piece of insight.
And it's the same as when you join a new organization. You turn up and everyone puts you through induction. At the end of the induction, instead of saying, do you know how to do the 3-factor verification when you log on to our CRM system? Why don't you turn around and go, what have you seen here that where you worked before, we could learn something from? No one ever does that. What we do is go, everything that happened before is bad.
Yeah.
Everything we do is great. And no one ever says, from your perspective, how does this feel? How does this work? Because you've got fresh eyes. It's like when you turn up in an organization, it's really easy to get kind of indoctrinated into the way we do things here. And actually, it might be really pants.
Yeah.
And
Well,
you need,
and I think, having just gone through the experience after a long old time of changing organizations, that the whole approach that I've experienced has been here's how we do things, and it is largely really amazing. But what do you think about that, and what can you bring us, and how can you take, and it is about that mix, Neil, of diversity, because diversity is it has to be thinking styles, different creative approaches, not just we've brought some women here now into the organization.
Right.
It has to be, as you know, kind of cognitive diversity. And I think when you do bring in new people, to have that ability to go, how do you add to our playlist? This is one of the things that I've talked about for a while, actually, which is, how if you want to bring new people in, it's not about them replicating your playlist, it's about them adding to your playlist. And actually, it's harder to do that, but it's, if you can systemize it, if you can make it part of your best practice, then it will lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the things I really liked about the book was the way you structured it. So you had a kind of the 4 seasons you created 4 parts, right? So spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And spring seems to be sort of building on a lot of what you're saying here, because you're talking about ideas for radical change, right? And sort of coming up with more transformational thinking and ideas. One of the things that it's an interesting point. So you were talking there about what new kind of perspectives can bring to an organization, and it's always an interesting question, I think, to think about what would this look like if we were to design it from scratch today, right? Without any of the assumptions or any of the legacy thinking that has gone before, and that may well be completely different. And in that spring section, you talk about using new. So tell me a bit more about how people can bring those different perspectives in to really open up different and radical thinking.
And there's probably a couple of ways that spring to mind. One of them absolutely is the "we wouldn't start from here" perspective, and I increasingly think that so many large businesses are hidebound by the way that they have been doing things, and there is a tendency when new things come up to go, well, we'll go acquire that, or we'll add this into our already existing ways of doing things. And there are clear spaces opening up between one set of businesses and another set of businesses in terms of how they operate things. And that could be from the user journey and the user experience, or it could be, for example, that integration of AI. And one of the jokes about AI is that if it's working, it's called an engineering tool, and if it's not working, it's called Gen AI. Don't worry about the hallucinations, kind of thing. So I think absolutely, before you staple something in, you need to start to explore what would happen if you started again from scratch. But the other way is actually just new people and young people. And one of the examples that we talk about is Arsene Wenger at Arsenal. I love a footballing analogy. I haven't got where I am today in this business for that footballing analogy.
Despite not knowing anything about football.
I know a little bit about football. I played as a goalie when I was 11. Anyway, Arsene Wenger, really had a very, very strong, was one of the first people to have a very, very strong youth academy, which they still do. And that idea that somebody doesn't have to be 45 before you put them in charge of anything. Maybe they're brilliant and maybe they're 26 and maybe, they haven't got as much experience as someone who's 46, but they've got experience that comes from a different place. And with the right kind of guidance and with the right kind of mentoring, they will absolutely double down on shortcutting, not walking through all the paths of how we normally do things around here, but just shortcutting and going straight to, this is the change that we need to make.
Yeah. And I mean, Kathryn, maybe I can ask you this, but so one of my little bugbears is about how companies are very keen, or teams are very keen, to look at sector specific case studies and say, well, that's not relevant to us because it's outside of our sector, or what's best practice in our sector. And I always think, from the point of view of creativity, that sector case studies are brilliant at best practice and optimization, I suppose. You're getting bigger and better and faster and more efficient at what you're doing, but they're far less good at challenging your norms and getting you to think differently. So looking outside of your sector, for me, feels like a much more productive thing to do if you are looking for genuinely breakthrough ideas. But it becomes a bit of a habit, doesn't it, to just look at your own sector and look at your competition. And one of the things you talk about in that section as well, Kathryn, is about breaking out of habits and rituals and norms. So I guess my question here is, how can you kind of break out of that sort of immediate sort of knee-jerk kind of response, or kind of wanting to just look within your existing domain, or where you're comfortable, perhaps? What are the ways in which you can do that?
I think there's a variety of ways. I mean, if you're serving the public in any way, that's the same as if you're a shop or a restaurant or what have you. It's all about the end user experience. So what can you learn about that end user experience? And the reason why people look within their own sector is because it's safe, and then you're not going to upset anybody, and it'll all be fine because they did this before. And if we just tweak it a little bit, and if we do incremental stuff, I mean, there's a great Josh Goldstein, who's the global CMO of Warner Brothers, has this great story about Barbie, which of course I'm very fond of. But Josh said that when they did the trailer for Barbie, and it was the opening bit of the film, and normally they wouldn't, the norm is that you mash together all the best bits and go, which is why sometimes the entire film is in the trailer and you go, well, I don't need to see that. I've already seen that film. But it was the opening bit where girls are just playing with dolls in an old-fashioned way, and then Barbie turns up, and then they break the dolls, they throw them away and what have you. And it's this kind of spoof of 2001: A Space Odyssey, but kind of like with this take on it. And that is not a normal trailer. And Josh told us this great story when Sue and I were talking to him, and he said, and I showed this to the marketing teams, and I said, I want this to be the trailer, and they all hated it. Right. And they went, that isn't a normal trailer for a film like Barbie. And he said, yeah, I know. That's why I want to go with it, because it's not the norm. And then the media, the way that they scheduled it, so, they run it against certain films, he put it in Avatar: Way of Water. Now, the safe thing is to go, I'll put it in a film that is female-centric, possibly so-and-so, because that's what we do. And he said, I put it in Avatar. He said, because why wouldn't I? He said, it made people go, excuse me, that isn't the film I think it is. So the trailer was one thing. If you'd have run that trailer in and basically you took all of the rules and just chucked them up in the air. And it's like the film poster. The film poster was just pink with a date on. Nothing. Yeah. Nothing else. And normally it goes, it's got in a time of love and a time of war. Here is Neil Perkins, none of that. None of that. It was just, come on then.
Well, I'm
And
looking,
the
I'm
same
looking
as,
forward to that film with Noel Perkin, by the way.
so am I. Yeah, I'm having trouble. Obviously Neil has to go above Tom Cruise, and Tom's struggling with that at the moment. But it is that thing where they just turn the entire thing around, and then it was, and then, you know, Sue's great point is AI would never have come up with putting a film about a doll and the discovery of, you know, and how the nuclear bomb happened on the same weekend. But that just worked. And the other thing is both companies just went, we're just going to go with it. We're just going to go with Barbenheimer. And they let their stars do stuff together. You'd never normally do that. You know, it would just be, no, we are fighting for box office. And they didn't. They just embraced it. And I love that, because it was a thing where it could have gone horribly wrong. But because they thought, yeah, but we just need to surprise people. And actually, if you just do the things within your sector, it's like 17 shades of beige or taupe or vanilla. You know, it's that whole thing of, it's just a bit, and how are you going to get standout? And also the other thing is, how are you going to get your people motivated? It's like, what we're going to do is we're going to make a minor change to our operating system. What's going to happen is we're going to change the background color of the intranet to purple. And we all want to work in places where we think, where you get up and you think it's going to be different. It's going to be, we're on a road to doing something different, rather than what we're doing is we're doing a cut and paste of someone else's stuff, but just in our type. You know, we've changed the typeface from sans serif to Calibri Light. Crazy. And to get people invested in what you do. Sorry, that was rather rambly.
No, I think it's a really excellent point. I mean, it actually reminds me of a point you make in the second section, Summer, which is about how organizations can flower and be fruitful, I think you say. But I love the way you phrase this, which is be more Wimbledon.
Yeah.
And this is about the idea of adopting the second serve. I'm just going to read out a quote about what you mean by that, which I picked out. It says, "The genius of the tennis game lies in the second serve. What other game or profession authorizes you to make your best shot with no worry of failure?" Love that. So tell me a bit more about this sort of idea of be more Wimbledon.
I have to say it's something that I am absolutely doubling down on myself, which is go for it and see, maybe frame the fact that you're going to go for it. So whatever your next big pitch is, whether that's a creative idea, whether that's your pitch for a promotion, whether that's your ideas for how a team can work in a different way together, whatever it is that you're doing, actively think about having two thoughts. Too often we come up with a wild idea and then spend all of our time making that acceptable to what you're double guessing the people that you're pitching it to will find acceptable. So I might go, well, I love the idea of Kathryn and I appearing on Saturday Night Live, but Kathryn's going to think that's a really stupid idea, and she can't afford the time anyway, and she's way too busy, and she's got to go to the Paddington premiere instead. And so I then might reduce
Paddington premiere is a sore point, because I thought it was in the evening and it's in the afternoon, so we can't have lunch together.
She's ditched me for Paddington, but that's fine. It's fine. No, but the point being that I would then turn that idea of let's pitch appear on Saturday Night Live into something that goes, maybe I don't know, maybe we can try and get some afternoon together where we talk about pitching an idea that's much safer than that. And I think stop second guessing yourself. I'm feeling like I've lost myself in my metaphor, really, but the point is don't second guess until you've tried out the outrageous idea. Shoot for the stars. Don't think, I know so-and-so isn't going to like that, so I must come up with ruthless logic and contain the thought. Shoot for the stars. Have that second idea as backup. there was a summer when I watched, I think it might have been during the pandemic actually, when I watched an awful lot of CSI Miami, you know, when none of us got to go out much. And Horatio from CSI Miami had a phrase that he used to say. He used to say, if you don't have a plan B, you don't have a plan. Well, have a plan B, but don't stop yourself really shooting for the stars with a plan A. And that might mean that you go into that meeting, or you go to that client, or you go to that conversation and you say, I've got two thoughts here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about the one that I really passionately believe in. And then, yeah, if you want, I can show you something that fits more within the tram lines that we've currently got. But feel empowered to go for that first serve, because there's always a backup.
Yeah, I mean, unless they're going to, you know, summarily take you outside and shoot you for having an idea that they didn't quite like, there's always a second chance, because actually sometimes in the feedback for your big idea, people say, yeah, that would work, but we need Simon to do something. And then you go back and you say, well, we could do this. And then while we're doing this interim idea, Simon can work on my big first serve idea. There is always another way. The idea that, you know, there is only ever one, the thought there's only ever one idea and there's nothing else. Go for the biggest, bravest idea, because why wouldn't you? It's the thing that's going to give you standout. And it's always, I don't know about you, but it's always the work where you think, oh, slightly squeaky bottom time. Yeah. It's always the work you're proudest of, rather than when you go, well, Sue, if what we did was we just made like that tiny.
And I think, you know, I'm not against incremental gains. Incremental gains are very important. They're very valuable. But sometimes you need that you know, big step change. And we think, or we've been sort of taught to believe, that we've got to be really logical about ourselves. Talking about mentioning other people's books, my husband's just written a book called Best Story Wins, and he makes this point in this. It's about storytelling, but he makes this point in it that when we're kids, if your parents or your caregivers, if they sell you something with logic, you actually know it's going to be disappointing. So if your mum says to you, Neil, we're going to visit Auntie Mary this afternoon. She's got a very big garden and she might make that cake you like. You know it's going to be dull, right? You know it's going to be boring. Because if she said, we're going to see Auntie, you know, Helen, you'd be going, yay, I love Auntie Helen. She's got great cakes. And it's so there's almost something in human nature that says, if you make it entirely surrounded by logic, it doesn't make us buy it more, because we buy things emotionally, whether we think we do or not. So I think Jung said once, we should really stop pretending that we're buying on logic, because we're not. So put your heart into it. And I think the idea of the second serve, the being more Wimbledon, and I said this the other day to somebody who grew up in Wimbledon, and she went, be more Wimbledon. That's a small part of that small village in southwest London. I'm trying to get out of Wimbledon. It's not literally about Wimbledon, but that idea that you can almost grant yourself that psychological safety for the first serve, because you know you've got a follow-up second serve. That's very empowering, and it's a way of giving yourself psychological safety, I think.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading about that, I was it reminded me of the moonshot idea. So kind of Google's moonshot idea. Yeah. And that I think originally came from the John F. Kennedy speech, where he stood up in the early 60s and said, by the end of this decade, we're going to put a man on the moon. And at the time, none of the technology existed to put a man on the moon. So NASA obviously had to spend a frantic sort of 6 or 7 years kind of inventing loads of stuff in order to put a man on the moon. Now, one of the things you talk about in the autumn section relates to that, I think. And the autumn section is about when an insight is not enough to deliver a creative solution. But you talk about things, you talk about doing things in the wrong order. So in other words, starting at the end. So is one of the ways in which you can achieve those kind of breakthrough ideas is by having that kind of moonshot idea at the beginning, and then working back from there to thinking about what do we need to do now to start making that kind of moonshot happen. What do you think about that?
That's exactly it. So where do you want to get to? Because all too often what we sit we don't decide the destination. We talk about what we could do now and could it be that. So it is that thing about if we want to get there. And then the other thing about starting at the end is you don't say, in 6 months' time, Sue, you and I will be starring on a new version of Saturday Night. See, I do listen to what she says. You and I will have our own Anton Decker stepping down.
Yeah.
Could be time for a Saturday night shiny floor show led by two women who've known each other a long time, who have never had a career in showbiz before.
Yeah, definitely.
Why not? We've both done RADA training.
Yeah.
We're very good.
We're very
good
funny.
projection.
Yeah.
I think you're very funny,
and I'd love to. Very funny.
I'd like to spend Saturday night.
You make me laugh.
And oh, stop it. Anyway, so why don't you start with that? Looks really, even if, and then work backwards to what we need to do.
How on earth do you get to that?
How on earth do you get to that? So we'd probably need an agent.
Yeah.
And
we might start out by doing the very prestigious Google Firestarters podcast. Actually, mightn't we? That could be our start.
That is obviously the start.
Yeah.
Did you not tell Neil? Did you not tell Neil that? I mean, because Neil will obviously be leaving shortly to go and star in an action film with Tom Cruise. Yeah. So this is going to be his final thing, is launching the showbiz careers of various people. So it is that thing, which is, if that's what we want to do, how do we get there? Because all too often we start off with where are we now and what next?
Yes.
So why not go? Yeah, well, it's brave and it's a bit, and it feels like a bit audacious. But what? Because otherwise you do the thing about, oh no, we can't do that, Neil, because we've never made those type of biscuits before. If we're going
and it takes and people get deterred because it takes so long to get there.
Yeah,
and it's back to those. Yeah, but there could be shortcuts. Yeah. And I once worked with, I don't know whether you knew her or not, Neil, Jan Smith, very revolutionary CMO, launched First Direct, relaunched the RAC. And one of the things that always impressed me about Jan, shout out to Jan if you're listening, is that she wouldn't go from A to B. She would be going, let's go from A to Q, and then let's work out how we'll get there. And I think we limit ourselves by starting at A sometimes, and then almost not even from A to B, but A to A.1, A.2, A.3. Because it could be that if we don't go down the normal routes, we can jump from A to Q. And the question is, how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're talking now, I guess I'm thinking about like futurists. You often use a model called possible futures, or the futures cone, as it's sometimes called. And that's the idea of like, you're reimagining things and creating about things which may be impossible now, but may become possible. So that's a possible future. But what they then talk about is how you turn the possible future into a plausible future. So you're making it more plausible, and then you turn plausible things into probable things. So you're just breaking it down. You're working out what needs to change in order to make something that was previously impossible suddenly probable. So I guess one of the things that that leads me to is a question about your point about, we so often start with where we are now and forget about how things are changing and how fast things are changing. And the fact that actually, where we're going to end up is probably going to be very different based on how things are going to change over the next couple of years or so. So do you think that's a really common mistake that sort of people make, that they actually just think about what's possible now and not what's going to be possible and perhaps in a couple of years' time?
And it's not even a couple of years' time, Neil, is it? It's a couple of months' time. I mean, things are now changing so fast, and the pace of change is I don't need to tell you, this is speeding up. And I can remember years ago seeing Martha Lane Fox, the internet entrepreneur, speak to a bunch of civil servants, and she was saying, the pace of change is breathtaking, but get ready for this, because it's going to come even more breathtaking. It's going to become even more breathless. And I think that's exactly what's going on. So the pace in which people are inventing, that AI is developing, the impossibility now of it's not even fear of missing out anymore. It's fear of not understanding exactly what I'm supposed to have already known about. It's getting faster and faster than ever, and there's two sorts of people, I think, in the world. There's I mean, I'm summarizing it ruthlessly now, and this is a kind of one of the standardized ways of thinking about people. There's towards people and there's away from people. There's people who are worried about things going wrong and are risk averse and who are working along the lines of let's make things safe. And then there's people who are running towards things. And both of us need to accept that. Both of us, those types of people, need to accept and embrace the other side. So I think the people that are running very fast, you know, I never really like the phrase move fast and break things, because it implies carelessness. But that idea that you can be agile, which I know is one of your big areas of expertise, that you can get to something whereby you make something, you're open to it changing, you're open to it adapting, you've got a couple of ways of testing things, you've got a system for measuring those tests. That's a way of moving fast, but in a safe and secure way. And then for people who are more away from that are risk averse, just really to acknowledge the pace of how fast things are changing, and that you can't sit in your here's how we've been doing things for a while and we're going to carry on doing things like this without expecting to have real competitive pressure. And I think, you know, and we're not going to name names or name brands, but I think if you look out into the world today, it's kind of obvious which sorts of businesses are full of away from people and which sorts of businesses are managing to embrace that pace of change.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I think coming into the sort of final part of your book, you in the winter section, as it were, you talk about how sometimes the toughest problems need a complete transformation of the creative approach itself. And one of my favorite stories, actually, there, and I wonder if I can ask you about this, is about Stan Lee. He's the famous sort of comic writer, of course. And you know how he was once struggling, but then went through this kind of creative revolution. Tell the listeners here a bit more about the story of Stan Lee and how that can inspire.
That's going to be Sue, because I've wanged on about films more than enough.
So Stan Lee, I once met Stan Lee actually, and what an amazing man he was. So Stan Lee is the genius behind Marvel Comics, and we have all heard of Spider-Man. We've all heard of the X-Men. Obviously, they are now, you know, a really successful Hollywood franchise. But he started out in comics in the 1930s and 1940s. And it was at a time when the comics were very, they were pulp fiction, really. They were very disposable. They were very, very formulaic. And he got to a point where he was actually hating the work that he was doing. So he was sort of, you know, rolling out yet another story that followed a formula that you know was very safe. Everybody was very you know, lots of perfect American kids, and he was getting so upset about it, and he thought, you know, I should quit this. One day I'm going to write the great American novel, and he was really, really unhappy. And his wife actually said to him, well, if you're going to quit and do something that you love, quit and do something that you know. And so he basically burnt all his bridges and set up on his own. And the first series was the Fantastic Four. The second series was Spider-Man. And what you'll notice, and then the X-Men, and what you'll notice about all of those characters, if you've ever read any of those comics, is that they're very, very flawed individuals. So they're weirdo kids, right? And I think any of us and that's probably most of us, that grew up, you know, not being the most popular kid in class and, you know, thinking, what is it about me? You know, Stan Lee had this genius thing where he made that sort of flaw the superpower. And all of the Marvel comics really contain that kind of genius. And they obviously became massively, massively successful. He then himself went through a period, and I think it was before special effects really took off in cinema, where he basically was trying to get movies made, but they weren't working. And it was only when the special effects lived up to his thinking and his imagination that he had that second round of even bigger success. And one of the delightful things, if you are a superhero movie fan, which I am, about the Marvel movies, is that until his death, obviously until his death, he used to have a cameo role in each of them. So it's like really worth revisiting them, because at some point in the Avengers Assemble movie, Stan Lee will turn up and do a little cameo role, and it's really quite delightful. But a extraordinary man who really fulfilled his potential, because at one point he gave up all of his security, he burnt his bridges, and he just acted against his passion.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. Unfortunately, we're running short on time, which is a real shame, but I'm going to ask you both a quite tricky question now, which is, out of your 52 smart ideas that you write about in the book, I'm going to ask you each to pick one, and so either one that you want to leave the listeners with, or one which is your particular favorite. So maybe Kathryn, if I can come to you first.
Mine is be lazy like a summer afternoon.
Oh, tell us more.
Because we live in a world of intense, when you say to people, how are you? People become really busy. Like, that's a badge of honor. And how are you ever going to have the capability of letting an idea develop if you're always like that the whole time?
Yeah.
There's a great story about Aaron Sorkin, which is Aaron Sorkin always said he came up with his best ideas when he was in the shower. So they built him a shower next to his office so he could go and have a shower. I mean, obviously he's very clean. I'm not suggesting that we all do that, and build a shower. But that whole idea that when you're not thinking, sometimes the best stuff comes, And Sue sometimes, had me kind of messaging going, I've had this thought and I've been walking my dogs, and what have you. And so I'm not making myself think. And I love that idea of giving yourself a break to let your mind just expand and explore.
Yeah, that's lovely. Brilliant. And Sue?
What would someone else say? So this coming back in a way full circle to diversity, but I do love old movies. There's a movie called Barefoot in the Park, which is one of my favorite all-time Sunday afternoon, perhaps you've had a big night out the night before and you just need to chill, movies. And the writer, a guy called Neil Simon, they had reached a point with this film, the writer and the director, where it's a lovely story about a young couple and they've just got married and they're bickering and things aren't going well, and they're in this space in New York that's kind of too small for them, and it's a very funny movie, but they didn't have an end for it. And they were doing a rehearsal of the original play, and one of the one of the crew's friends, a very funny woman called Lillian Hellman, turned up, and she was much older than everybody else that was in the cast, with one exception, which is the mother-in-law. And she said, well, it would be a great ending actually if the twist is that the mother-in-law starts having a fling with the guy that lives upstairs. And when you watch the movie, I mean, I probably should say spoiler alert, but when you watch the movie, it's got this lovely, lovely twist. It isn't the final twist, actually. It's got a lovely, lovely twist in it that absolutely brings richness to the movie. And the director and the writer acknowledged that if she hadn't have made that suggestion, they would never have thought of that, because they would have thought, what? A woman of her age running off with the man upstairs? So go and get another opinion. See what somebody else would say. Don't go, I'm only going to talk to people like me. Break that mold, and there a real rich creativity lies.
Brilliant. That's such a good note on which to end a fascinating discussion. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to remind the listeners, the book is called 52 Smart Ideas for Boosting Creativity, Innovation and Inspiration.
Year of Creativity.
A year of creativity. You're right. Sorry, Sue. So very good. Loads of stories like we've talked about today in there. So recommended. And if you enjoyed this episode, of course, don't forget to subscribe and to share. And my thanks again to Kathryn and Sue for coming on the podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you.